The late afternoon sun was sinking into the horizon, casting long shadows across the deserted highway. Judge Malcolm Evans, a towering figure in both stature and reputation, drove steadily in his sleek, black sedan. He was used to the road between his courthouse and the quiet countryside where he lived a peaceful, isolated retreat from the daily battles in court. His day had been long, filled with the usual tension of defending the law, balancing justice, and reminding the world that not all men in power wield it fairly. But that evening, something felt off. The distant glow of red and blue lights danced in his rearview mirror, growing closer, their silent threat palpable. Judge Evans glanced down at his speedometer. He wasn't speeding. His vehicle was in perfect condition. There was no reason to be pulled over. Yet, the sirens wailed behind him, demanding submission. Evans sighed and eased his car to the side of the road, his heart quickening despite his calm demeanor. He had been in this situation before. The badge of judge didn't always protect him, especially not from those whose judgment was clouded by the color of his skin. The officer approached slowly, deliberately, his hand resting on the gun holstered at his side. Evans could feel the tension before the man even spoke. The cop was young, maybe late 20s, but the way he walked swaggering with arrogance and entitlement spoke volumes. As he drew nearer, Evans caught a glimpse of his face, hard, cold, and laced with the kind of disdain that black men like him had felt for centuries. License and registration. The officer barked without preamble, his tone devoid of the courtesy that should have been afforded to any citizen, let alone someone of Evans' standing. Judge Evans remained composed, though a tight knot formed in his chest. He handed over the documents, offering a polite, "Good evening, officer. May I ask what this is about?" The cop took the papers without acknowledging the question, glancing down at them with a dismissive grunt. He didn't bother looking at Evans directly, his eyes instead scanning the inside of the car, as though searching for anything that could justify what was already a baseless stop. "You were swerving," the officer lied, his gaze flicking to Evans with a dangerous spark. "You been drinking tonight?" Evans raised an eyebrow, his voice steady but firm. "No, officer, I haven't. I've been driving straight, well within the speed limit." The officer's lips curled into a sneer. "That's so. We'll see about that. Step out of the vehicle." There it was, the order that every black man, no matter his station in life, dreaded. Evans hesitated for only a moment, his mind racing. He was Malcolm Evans, the most powerful judge in the district. But here, on this dark stretch of road, none of that mattered. To this cop, he was just another black man to be controlled, to be reminded of his place.
Before you continue watching the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. Let's support our people.
Evans opened the door slowly, his large frame emerging from the car with measured movements. He knew better than to make any sudden motions, especially with the officer's hand still dangerously close to his gun. As Evans stood by his car, the officer circled him, a predator sizing up his prey. His voice was dripping with mockery now. "Judge, that's real nice. But out here, it doesn't mean a damn thing." The cop's words cut deeper than any insult Evans had heard in the courtroom. The badge he wore, the oath he had taken to uphold justice, all seemed to crumble under the weight of the officer's blatant racism. Power was supposed to protect him, but here he stood, stripped of all his authority, reduced to just another black man on the side of the road. The officer demanded Evans perform a sobriety test, despite there being no legitimate reason to do so. Evans knew his rights. He knew this was harassment, pure and simple. But he also knew that refusing could escalate the situation into something far worse. So, with quiet dignity, he complied, walking in a straight line, touching his nose, doing everything the officer asked, all while the pit in his stomach grew heavier. The young cop was clearly growing frustrated. There was no sign of impairment, no reason to arrest the judge, but that didn't seem to matter. He wasn't looking for a crime, He was looking to assert his power, to humiliate Evans for daring to be both black and powerful. "All right, hands on the hood," the officer snapped. Evans' patience finally thinned. "What for? You've seen that I'm not under the influence. There's no cause for this." The officer stepped closer, his face contorted with anger. "I said, hands on the hood." Evans stood his ground. "This is an unlawful stop. I know my rights." That was all it took. In an instant, the officer's hand flew to his gun, drawing it and aiming it at Evans' chest. The cold metal glinted in the dying light, but it was the look in the officer's eyes that sent a chill down Evans' spine. It was hatred, plain and simple. "Do you think I give a damn about your rights, boy?" The word, thick with venom, hung in the air between them. "Out here, I'm the law." For a split second, the world froze. Evans stared down the barrel of the gun, his heart pounding in his chest. In all his years as a judge, as a man who had dedicated his life to upholding justice, he had never felt so powerless. This wasn't about the law anymore. This was about race. This was about reminding him that, in the eyes of men like this officer, he would never be more than the color of his skin. The officer's finger twitched on the trigger, and for a moment, Evans thought this might be the end. But then, in the distance, headlights appeared, approaching fast. The officer cursed under his breath, glancing over his shoulder. The momentary distraction was all Evans needed. "I am Judge Malcolm Evans," he said, his voice low but filled with unshakable authority. "And if you shoot me, you'll spend the rest of your life in prison." The cop froze, the words sinking in. He hadn't expected his victim to fight back, certainly not with such calm confidence. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. The cop's hand wavered for a moment, his face tightening with a mixture of fear and fury. For a brief second, it seemed as though Judge Evans' words had managed to crack the officer's iron facade. But then, just as quickly, the sneer returned. "You think that badge of yours means something out here?" The cop spat. "You think you're special because of that robe?" Evans didn't flinch. His calm, unyielding gaze remained fixed on the officer. "I think the law means something, and I know your actions tonight will follow you." Behind the officer, the headlights of the approaching car grew brighter. The officer turned slightly, just enough to take his eyes off Evans, as if deciding whether to proceed with his illegal stop or retreat before more witnesses arrived. The tension in the air was suffocating, the weight of centuries of oppression pressing down on this moment. The headlights came to a halt a few feet away, and the driver's door creaked open. A middle-aged black woman stepped out, her face a mask of concern. She had seen the interaction from a distance and pulled over, aware that something was horribly wrong. Without hesitation, she took out her phone and began filming. "Is there a problem here, officer?" she called out, her voice steady but tinged with righteous anger. The officer's head snapped toward her, his hands still gripping the gun pointed at Evans. His eyes darted between the woman, her phone, and the judge standing resolute before him. This was the last thing he had wanted a witness, especially one willing to record his every move. "Mind your business, lady," the officer barked, though there was a quiver in his voice now, uncertainty creeping into his once steady demeanor. The woman didn't budge. She held her phone up higher, capturing everything. "I'm making this my business. I know who that man is. You can't do this to him." Evans watched the scene unfold, feeling a surge of gratitude toward the woman. Her presence shifted the balance of power. The officer knew that, if this video went public, there would be consequences. There always were, though too often. They were fleeting, superficial. A suspension, maybe a demotion, but rarely true justice. Yet in this moment, the camera gave them a shield, however thin. "Lower the weapon," Evans said, his voice a command now, no longer a plea. The cop's eyes darted back to him, rage bubbling beneath the surface. But the cop's eyes darted back to Evans, rage bubbling beneath the surface. But now there was hesitation too, a visible crack in his bravado. His grip on the gun loosened ever so slightly. his fingers twitching as if uncertain whether to pull back or push forward into irreversible violence. The woman filming took a cautious step closer. "Everyone's watching now," she said firmly. "You can't hide this. Whatever you do next, the world's going to see it." The officer's jaw clenched. His face flushed red, either from anger or the realization that he was losing control of the situation. For a man like him, control was everything. But here, standing before a powerful black judge and under the scrutiny of a camera, his control was slipping fast. Judge Evans held his ground, not moving, not backing down. His calm, collected demeanor was a stark contrast to the seething officer. Evans had spent his life navigating these waters, being underestimated, disrespected, harassed, all because of the color of his skin. But today, he was not going to bow. Not this time. The tension stretched, thick and suffocating. Then, finally, the officer made his choice. He holstered his gun, the snap of leather against metal loud in the quiet air. His face was still twisted with frustration, but he took a step back. "You're free to go," he muttered through gritted teeth, barely able to look Evans in the eye. Evans didn't move immediately. Instead, he let the silence hang, making sure the officer felt every second of his shame. Only when the cop shifted uncomfortably did the judge finally speak. "You made the right decision, officer," he said calmly, but his words carried the weight of judgment, of unspoken consequences that would follow long after this night. The officer turned sharply, retreating to his patrol car, his face flushed and tight with barely contained rage. As he slammed his door shut and sped off down the road, the tension finally broke. The woman with the phone slowly lowered her hand, her eyes wide, still processing what had just happened. I can't believe that," she breathed. "I thought for sure he was going to." Evans nodded, his chest rising and falling as the adrenaline began to ebb. "So did I," he said quietly. She stepped closer, her phone still recording, just in case. "Are you all right, sir?" Evans offered her a small, tired smile. "I'm all right now, thanks to you." He paused, studying her face. "You were brave to stop, to record that. A lot of people wouldn't have." The woman shrugged, but there was pride in her eyes. "I couldn't just drive by and let him do that. I've seen too much of this kind of thing." Her voice grew softer, tinged with a sadness that Evans recognized all too well. "We've all seen too much." The two of them stood there for a moment in silence, the weight of the encounter lingering in the air, heavy with the knowledge that, though it was over for now, this kind of confrontation was far from rare. For Evans, it was a painful reminder that even the highest achievements, even the title of judge, didn't fully shield him from the harsh realities of being a black man in America. Finally, Evans extended his hand to the woman. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice warm. "Angela," she replied, shaking his hand firmly. "Angela Baker." "Angela, you might have just saved my life," he said, gratitude filling his voice. She shook her head modestly. "I didn't do much, just held up my phone." "You did more than that," Evans said. "You took a stand, and that means something." Angela nodded slowly, absorbing his words. "I'm just glad you're all right." Evans looked out over the empty road, the fading sunlight casting long shadows over the pavement. "For now," he said softly, "but we still have a long way to go." Days later, the video Angela had recorded quickly went viral. It spread like wildfire across social media, sparking outrage and debate. Commentators dissected the footage, highlighting how close the situation had come to tragedy. News outlets ran the story non-stop, focusing on how a powerful judge had been subjected to such blatant racism. The officer involved was suspended, pending an investigation. But Evans knew that such investigations rarely led to real consequences. He had seen it too many times in his career. There would be public outrage, perhaps a temporary punishment, and then the system would move on, unchanged, as it always did. But this time, there was a difference. People were paying attention. The video had struck a nerve, not just because Evans was a judge, but because it had happened to someone in a position of authority, a reminder that no black person, no matter their rank or status, was immune to the poison of racism. A week after the incident, Evans found himself standing in front of a packed courtroom. The public outcry had forced a hearing on police conduct, and Evans had been called as a witness. He stood tall, his voice measured, as he recounted the events of that night. His testimony was clear and powerful, a condemnation not just of the officer who had harassed him, but of the entire system that allowed such behavior to persist. When he finished speaking, the courtroom was silent. All eyes were on him, waiting for his final words. Evans looked out at the crowd, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. "This isn't just about me," he said. "It's about every black person who has been stopped, questioned, harassed, or worse, simply because of the color of their skin. It's about a system that continues to fail us, that protects those who abuse their power and punishes those who seek justice. We cannot allow this to continue. We must demand better, not just for ourselves, but for the generations to come." As he left the courtroom, surrounded by reporters and flashing cameras, Evans knew that the fight was far from over. The wheels of justice turned slowly, too slowly, but they did turn. And as long as there were people like Angela, like those who refused to remain silent, there was hope that one day the system might truly change. Back in his quiet home, away from the noise and attention, Judge Evans sat in his study, staring out the window at the evening sky. The same road stretched out before him, the same darkness creeping in. But now, there was something else, something new. A determination, deep and uncheckable, that this moment would not be forgotten. Justice had been deferred for far too long, video and but Evans, hearings, like so many others, Judge Malcolm was ready Evans to make sure into a new no longer denied. No longer just a respected figure within the courtroom, he had become a symbol of resistance and resilience. Black communities across the country leered around him, seeing in his experience their own. But with the support came scrutiny. Activists demanded more than just words from him, calling for a direct action. And the media fixated on every move he made, every comment he gave. Evans felt the pressure of it all more than he ever had before in his legal career. Being a judge had always required maintaining neutrality, but now people expected him to take a stand outside the courtroom too. It was a new kind of responsibility, one he couldn't ignore, but one that weighed heavily on his heart. One evening, as he sat alone in his study, reading through countless letters of support and demands for justice, he received a call. It was Angela Baker. "Judge Evans," she asked, her voice steady but tense. "Angela, good to hear from you. How are you?" Evans leaned back in his chair, feeling a sense of ease knowing it was her. "I'm all right. I wanted to talk to you about something important." There was a pause, a hesitation in her voice before she continued. "There's going to be a protest. A big one. People want you to speak." Evans had expected this, but still, the weight of it hit him. A protest. Yeah, against police violence. The video of what happened to you. It's become more than just a story. It's a rallying cry. People are organizing, demanding reforms. They see you as someone who can bring real change. Someone who understands both sides, the system and the people it's hurting. Evans sighed deeply, the enormity of it all pressing down on him. "Angela, I'm a judge. My job is to uphold the law, not to protest against it." "I understand that," she said, her voice softening. "But what happened to you wasn't just a random traffic stop. It was a reminder that the law isn't working the way it should for everyone. You've spent your life fighting for justice inside the system. Now people need you to fight outside of it." The silence on the other end of the line was palpable. Evans stared out his window into the darkening sky, the memories of that night flashing back in vivid detail: the gun, the officer's cold words, the feeling of helplessness despite all his power. "I don't know if I can be that person," he said quietly. Angela's voice was firm. You already are. The day of the protest, the city was buzzing with energy as crowds began gathering in the streets. Signs waved high in the air, voices chanting for justice, for change, for an end to police brutality. It wasn't just about Judge Evans anymore. His story had lit a match, but the fire had spread, igniting a movement that had been simmering beneath the surface for years. Evans stood at the edge of the crowd, his heart racing. He had never been one for public demonstrations, preferring the quiet authority of the courtroom. But today, he felt something different a pull, a sense of duty beyond his robe and gavel. He had always believed in the power of the law, but now he saw that the law wasn't enough on its own. It needed people voices, bodies, demands to push it toward true justice. Angela found him in the crowd, her face lit up with both nervousness and excitement. "You came," she said, her eyes bright. "I had to," Evans replied, looking around at the sea of faces. Black, white, young, old people from all walks of life had gathered here, united by a common purpose. "They're ready for you," Angela said, gesturing toward the makeshift stage in the center of the plaza. The crowd was swelling, eyes searching for him. The chants of his name began to ripple through the air, growing louder with each passing second. Evans took a deep breath and nodded, making his way through the crowd. As he climbed onto the stage, the noise around him became a roar. He could see the hope, the desperation, the fire in the eyes of the people looking up at him. They were tired of waiting, tired of excuses. They wanted change, and they believed he could help bring it. He stood in front of the microphone. The crowd hushed in anticipation. Evans looked out at them, his mind racing with the enormity of the moment. This wasn't the controlled environment of a courtroom. Here, the stakes were different, more raw, more urgent. "When I became a judge," he began, his voice steady, but filled with emotion, "I took an oath to uphold the law, to deliver justice without fear or favor. But what I've come to realize is that the law itself is not always just. It's not always fair, and it is not always applied equally." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. "What happened to me on that dark road wasn't unique. It happens to black men and women every day, across this country, in ways big and small. The difference is, I'm a judge. I had power, but even that didn't protect me from the reality of what it means to be black in America." He paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. "But this isn't just about me. This is about all of us, about the thousands of voices that have been silenced, about the lives that have been cut short, about the families who have been torn apart by violence and injustice." The crowd cheered, fists raised in solidarity. "And it's about the system that allows this to happen, a system that was built to protect some and oppress others, a system that needs to change, and it needs to change now." Evans' voice grew stronger, more resolute. "We can no longer wait for justice to come. We have to demand it. We have to fight for it. And that fight doesn't just happen in the courtroom. It happens here, in the streets, in our communities, in our schools, in our homes. It happens when we refuse to be silent, when we stand together and say, 'Enough is enough.'" The crowd erupted in applause, the sound thunderous. Evans felt a surge of emotion, a mix of anger, hope, and determination. This moment was bigger than him, bigger than any one person. It was a movement for real, lasting change. "I will continue to fight inside the courtroom," Evans said, his voice carrying over the sea of people. "But I will also fight with you. I will stand with you, because justice deferred is justice denied, and we will not be denied any longer." As he stepped back from the microphone, the crowd surged forward, their chants growing louder, more powerful. Evans felt the weight of history pressing down on him, but for the first time, he didn't feel alone in carrying it. Angela appeared beside him, her eyes shining with pride. "You did it," she said softly. Evans smiled, his heart full. "We did it." The ripple effect in the weeks that followed the protest, things began to shift. The viral video had sparked an investigation only into the officer who had pulled Evans over, but into broader patterns of abuse and discrimination within the police department. Reforms were being discussed, and Evans found himself at the center of conversations he had once only observed from the sidelines. He continued his work in the courtroom, but now there was a new fire in his heart, a sense of purpose beyond the cases he presided over. He knew that real change wouldn't come quickly or easily. The system was vast, and the forces against them were strong, but the movement was growing, and so was the hope that, together, they could make a difference. Judge Malcolm Evans, once content to quietly enforce the law, had become a warrior for justice, both inside and outside the courtroom. And while the road ahead was long and fraught with challenges, he was no longer walking it alone. With people like Angela and the countless others who refused to be silent, they would continue to fight not just for him, but for all those who had been wronged by a system that had denied them justice for far too long. And in the end, they would not be denied.
This is the end of the story. Don't forget to leave your opinions about this story, subscribe to the channel, and watch even more exciting stories.